Okay, thanks for joining us, Hannah. If you have a hidden talent, you could type it in the chat box and let us know what your hidden talent is. And I'm just about to get started. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Oh, you can lip read accents. Ooh, that is super cool. I got to write that up here. Lip read accents. And Hannah is a horse trainer. Put it in as a horse rider and trainer because those are two different skills. Wow. Great. Okay, thank you, everybody, for sharing your hidden talents with me. This is really great. We've got a lot of talent here on the call. I'm going to switch over to share my slides here so that we can jump into the presentation. We're scheduled to go up to the top of the hour. It's 10 a.m. for me here in New Zealand, where I am. And I know we've got people all around the world, from Australia to Indianapolis. So we're going to go through a bunch of information today on how to make our virtual meetings more accessible. And so I'm sharing some slides, and this first slide has my picture. I'm Caelan Huntress, and I'm the creative director of a digital marketing agency called Stellar Platforms, where I help entrepreneurs make more money in less time by setting up smart marketing systems. And I've been spending a lot of time on Zoom over the last few months, as many of us have. And I wanted to increase the accessibility of my presentations. Because as Matt May says, the head of inclusion at Adobe, what we have are a few people who know a lot about accessibility. And what we need are a lot of people to know a little about it. And so that's what we're doing today. We're educating ourselves about accessibility. And there might be some people here today who are that few who know a lot about accessibility. But I'm part of the lot who needs to know a little. I'm not an expert in accessibility, but when I wanted to learn, how can I make my webinars and virtual presentations more accessible, I went and found some really interesting statistics. It turns out that according to a Pew Research Center survey of Americans, that Americans with disability are 3 times as likely as people without disabilities to say they never go online. 8% of Americans say, oh, I never go online, but 23% of disabled Americans don't go online. And part of the reason is because it's not as accessible for abled people to interact with websites and to communicate with digital media. So here's a quick agenda of what we're going to go over today to help increase the accessibility of virtual meetings and presentations. We're going to go over the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, as it's known by an acronym. We'll talk about the types of accessibility that you can accommodate in your meetings. I'll go into some details about closed captioning in Zoom. And then finally, we're going to cover some best practices for presenting virtually. I'm also going to give you a checklist for the webinar accessibility checklist. And for those of you who registered for the live webinar, you should have gotten this via email earlier today, but I'll also send it out with the replay. And if you're watching this on the replay, there should be a link somewhere nearby that has a button to get this checklist. And I created this as a resource because when I was making my virtual meetings more accessible, I wanted to find the manual on how to make virtual meetings accessible. And there wasn't one. And so I did a lot of research, and I found that there's a lot of information for making meetings accessible. And there's plenty of information for making websites accessible. And here on this slide, I've got a picture of an auditorium with a lot of empty chairs and a picture of a monitor. These are the 2 ways that accessibility is really framed so far, is you can use a lot of these resources for how to make an in-person meeting accessible. And there's plenty of resources on making your website accessible. But in the crossover between the 2, there wasn't a whole lot. And so that's why I put this information together and why I created this checklist. And what I found was that WCAG is really the foundation of a lot of accessibility online. And the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines provide a series of specific testable rules that you can apply to a website to determine how accessible is this website. And it's got 3 grades. There's A, which is essential. It means that someone using assistive technology can interact with the website. There's AA, which means that not only can they access it, but they can access it well. And then there's AAA. And AAA is for specialized audiences, for websites that are for people with screen readers, or when it's made for people who are primarily using accessible technology. If you're creating a website for a general audience, then AA is where you want to aim for, and A is the bare minimum that your website needs to achieve in order to be accessible by all sorts of people. And there are 4 guidelines in WCAG. They say that a website has to be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And these are the 4 criteria that they use. And their specific testable rules, they all fall under one of these 4 categories. When something is perceivable, it means that we can understand it. And this is a picture of a magnifying glass over a cutout of a person. And we can perceive this person. If you're visually able, then you can see this slide that I'm sharing with you. And if you're not visually able, then I'm verbally describing what you're seeing here so that everyone can perceive the information I'm communicating to you. And so it means that the 3 senses that we primarily use to interact with the internet, sight, hearing, and/or touch, they're perceivable whether or not you are fully abled in those 3 senses. When something is operable, that means you can use it. And this is a photo of hands on a keyboard. And a keyboard is the primary way that visually impaired people interact with the internet. For people who have a disability regarding fine motor control, they might not be able to use a mouse, but they can operate a keyboard. And so if your website is operable, it means that people can use a keyboard to interact with it, and they don't have to rely on a mouse in order to operate your website. This is a photo that we see often in dog parks, and it communicates in 2 ways to really make this understandable. This sign says in text, "Please clean up after your pet." And it also has 3 illustrations of someone cleaning up after their pet. So even if you don't speak English, even if you can't read, this sign is still understandable. And for websites, this means that both the operation and the UI of the website should be understandable to all users. And then finally, there's robust. And this is a photo of graffiti that says robust, and it takes up a whole big chunk of wall. I really like graffiti as an art form. I think that seeing it in nature like this wall is surrounded by greenery and mountains, and you can see the robustness of the art in an interesting environment. And for web content, it needs to be robust enough that it can be interpreted by a wide variety of user agents, including those using assistive technology. And so these are the 4 primary components of WCAG, that something has to be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And that's for web content that we store online. But for virtual meetings, we really need to focus on these first 2, on making our virtual meetings and webinars perceivable and operable. According to the University of Washington, which has some great resources on accessibility for videos, and I've put a link to this in the webinar accessibility checklist, they define an accessible video as a video that includes captions, a transcript, and an audio description. If you have all 3 of these, then it will be perceivable to the 3 major senses. And again, this is a photo of a person in a cardboard cutout behind a magnifying glass because we can perceive it. And I'm describing this image to you so that if you're not visually abled, you can still perceive what I'm communicating. Now, when things are operable, and here we have a photo of hands on a keyboard, that means that you can operate it. And Zoom is best in class video conferencing technology. They design their technology to be completely accessible. You can use all of the Zoom interface with only a keyboard. They've got global shortcuts so that you can mute and unmute yourself. You can toggle between different areas. So the tool itself, it complies with WCAG 2.1 AA standards. It's an accessible tool. But how we communicate in Zoom might not be accessible. I'll give you an example. I was in a meeting once, and someone with a visual impairment who had about 20 to 30% vision capability. She was asked to describe these two icons. And she said, well, that's a hot water bottle, and that's a dentist's chair. And she's not wrong. That's what they look like to someone with low impaired vision. And if you're navigating through things with a screen reader, the way that you would perceive these icons is with alt text. Alt text is essential for identifying visual icons because they clearly state in text what this is supposed to represent. And putting alt text in website pages is one of the basic ways that you can make your web content more accessible. But you can also run into some difficulties with it. This is an icon of a hamburger menu. And we often see these on mobile websites. And I'm a web designer and I design lots of websites. And sometimes I do them fast and I don't really do everything I should. And so I've got a photo here of my website at caelanhuntress.com, and it has a hamburger menu in the corner because I can't list everything in the navigation bar, or the mobile version of my website doesn't look very good. And so it's become best practice online to have this hamburger menu where you can click on it and it expands the menu so that then you can see the menu choices. Well, what I had done in making my website more accessible is I left the alt text as hamburger, which means that if somebody was viewing my website through a screen reader, they'd see right there up at the top that I put a hamburger for some reason. And this is a picture of a facepalm. So I learned a lot about accessibility through websites like inclusivedesignprinciples.org. This is a screenshot of their homepage, and they've got a list of toggles. And you click on one of these and it goes into detail about each one of these principles, that your web experience should provide a comparable experience to people with and without disabilities. You should consider their situation in using your website. You should be consistent in how you present information. You should give them control to operate how they choose. You should offer them choices on how they're going to interact. Prioritize content, because some people might be there just for the content. And if you put in interaction or animation that they have to get through first, it decreases their ability to interact with the content. And finally, you want to add value, no matter how they're interacting with the website. So there's a link to inclusivedesignprinciples.org in the website accessibility checklist. And I designed a lot of that checklist around the principles of universal design, which is defined by the Universal Design Center at the University of North Carolina as the design of products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible, without the need for adaptation or specialized design. We don't want to have one version for abled people and another version for disabled people. We want to have a universal design that's accessible to all. So if we take slides as an example, if I was not using universal design, I would make a slide like this. And for those of you who can read the first bullet out of 10 bullets on here, one of the principles of universal design is to use 1 or 2 lines of text at a time. Because if I condense a whole bunch of information into one slide, even those of us who are visually abled, we have difficulty in interpreting and perceiving this content. So you don't need to read each one of these lines. Most of these are in the checklist itself, but I wanted to illustrate how things could be difficult without using universal design. And I've got a few more of these examples up ahead. But if you want to read those items that were on that slide in more detail, they're in bigger font and they're friendlier to read in the checklist. When you're designing visually, the two big components you need to pay attention to are contrast and size. If you take good care with contrast and size, you're going to take care of most of your visual design problems. There's also some things you can do with color in order to increase the ability to understand the content. And here's some examples of color contrast. If I write text in green, the contrast ratio between the foreground and the background, between the green and the white, is 1.4 to 1. It's pretty difficult to read. If I write text in red, it's 4 to 1. It's easier to read. If I write text in blue, then I can see why blue is so frequently used in websites online, because the contrast is much higher. It's 8.6 to 1. And the contrast ratio is one of these specific testable rules used in WCAG to determine, is this good enough for accessibility? In addition to color, we also have size. These are the same lines in a larger font size. And the green text, you can read a little easier. The red text is clearly visible, and the blue text is top-notch. So WCAG has guidelines for color and size that get very complicated. If you want to have a AAA WCAG rating, you want to have a 7 to 1 contrast ratio. If you're using red text, which is a ratio of 4 to 1, it might be AA and it might be AAA, depending on the size. If you make it very, very big, you don't need to have as high of a contrast ratio. And so this chart of colors is also in the webinar accessibility checklist, and it gives the hex codes that you can use for creating contrast ratios at these different breakpoints. So this gets more into the arcane web designer kind of stuff that we need to know, but I just wanted to introduce you to it as concepts as we're moving forward. So this is a picture of a meme. And this is a success kid meme, which many visually abled people might have seen and laughed at many times. This kid is saying, I ate spaghetti while wearing a white shirt and I didn't get sauce on it. And he's really happy about that. And this is a joke that requires a high contrast ratio. Look at the letters. Bright white with a black outline. The choice of font and case has made it so that this is legible, even though that there's a lot happening in the background. There's different colors. There's a photo behind it. But because this was designed intentionally, it means that it's legible, even though that it's breaking a lot of best practices. Usually we don't want to have multiple color backgrounds behind text. It's really hard to get a photo behind text. But if you take a lot of care with how you design the text, then you can actually make it legible. But there's a difficulty in interpreting memes like this through screen readers, because the alt text on this will be Success Kid. Even if I typed out the entire thing, it's hard to convey the visual joke here to somebody who doesn't have full visual capability. And so that's why we want to be cautious about what we introduce in our meetings. This is a photo of Beverly Reddick, who is using a screen reader to navigate the internet. And she works at US Air Force Command, and she has a guide dog behind her. She's completely blind, but by using a screen reader, she's able to not only interpret, but also navigate through a website. And next, I'd like to share with you a video that demonstrates how to use a screen reader. It's 2 minutes long, and it's gonna show someone who's completely blind using a screen reader to navigate on a web page.
This is Mark Sutton from the University of California, San Francisco's IT Web Services Department. Here today with a brief tour of screen reading technology. I'm a blind person who has been using screen readers, braille writers, scanning equipment, other adaptive technologies since my childhood. What a screen reader does is, for example, I'm going to start to read this page.
Navigation 1. Link, University of California, San Francisco, link, using SF, link, search using SF.
And what I will now do is slow down the speech rate.
Rating percent, 75%, 70%, 65, 60%, 55%, 50%, 45%, 40%, link, UCSF Medical Center.
So as I was about to say, a screen reader converts what's on a computer screen into information that can be displayed through synthetic speech or braille output. And it does that by allowing you to use a computer instead of a mouse, a computer keyboard instead of a mouse. You can also use a braille display as an input device.
End of navigation.
And what it does is it cleverly determines what's on the screen and presents you that information in a way that would allow for efficient navigation of these pages. So for example, I could just keep reading.
Banner 3 items. Visited, link, image, home.
Line by line, and we could be here all day. Or I could jump to the first heading on the page.
Heading level 2. Search for heading level 2. You are here. Heading level 1. Make videos accessible.
So as I'm moving down through the page, I can look for the category that interests me. And I'm just using commands built into the screen reader. So that's all a pretty simple description of what a screen reader is all about. Now I'm going to go over and show a few examples of how that can fall apart. So I have a couple graphics on this page.
Mark Sutton hands on the MacBook Pro image.
So the first one is well described and uses an alt tag.
You are currently on it.
To describe what that graphic is all about. Now we go to the next graphic.
Reader 042116.jpg.
Much less useful. So it's important to use those elements.
So that was a demonstration of how to use a screen reader to navigate through a website. Pop quiz. These slides that we're looking at right now during this presentation, are they accessible to screen readers? Who thinks yes? Give me a thumbs up if you think yes, or a thumbs down if you think no. What do we think? Got some thumbs downs? Yeah? Okay, all right, well, let me launch a poll here. How many people think, oh, come on, I don't have my cursor. There we go. Okay, so how many people think shared screens are accessible to screen readers? Got some votes coming in. Okay. All right. Now, what about this poll? Is this poll completely accessible? Or am I doing something inaccessible here to people with disabilities by launching this poll? Sorry, 1 second. Technical glitch. Everybody agreed. Shared screens are not accessible to screen readers. What a screen reader does is it interprets the shared screen as an HD video stream. And it says, oh, okay, you're looking at a video. I don't know what this video says. And there's nothing in it to navigate. Some of the programs that are used for screen readers are JAWS, which comes with a lot of Windows, VoiceOver, which comes with a lot of Mac computers. And these screen reader programs are used to navigate through elements that can be navigable, but an HD video stream isn't navigable. So some of the solutions for visually impaired people who are at your virtual meeting or your webinar is to provide them the slides beforehand. Send them the slides in advance because slides are legible to screen readers. They can navigate through and have the text narrated and have the alt tags in the images described. And also describe every slide verbally as you present. That's what I've tried to do during this presentation. Anytime we get to an image, I say, this is an image of, and describe it verbally. As Stevie Wonder says, we need everything to be accessible to every single person with a disability. So now let's talk about audio assistance. We've done a lot of time talking about visual assistance. One moment. Sorry, tech glitch. Here we go. And there's a few different options for audio assistance. Sign language is a great option, so that way you have a sign language interpreter attend your event and provide sign language interpretation. But there's challenges with sign language because American sign language is different than New Zealand sign language, is different than Australian sign language, and there's different dialects. And so an interpreter who speaks in one specific sign language dialect might not be able to be understood by speakers of different dialects. What a lot of people do for audio assistance is to provide a transcription, which is just a word-for-word translation of all your audio content. And you can send out a transcription with a replay and a text file. And Zoom makes it super easy. You click a couple toggles and then they'll give you a text file that you can send out later. But that's after the event. It doesn't help with a live event. And so if somebody wants to participate in a live event and they have, and they're hard of hearing, then that's why a lot of people go with captioning. Captioning helps not only with people who have an audio disability, but also with people who don't speak English very well. Seeing the words written in text can really increase understanding. And captioning should be synchronized with the visual content. That's a big advantage over transcripts, is that with a transcript, you have the transcript elsewhere, but you don't necessarily know if you're at the same place in the presentation. So if we were gonna have a sign language interpreter here, and this is a screenshot of one of my previous master classes, and I photoshopped in Alan Went, who's a New Zealand sign language interpreter, and he made New Zealand sign language history when he was interpreting for Jacinda Ardern a few months ago. And the Prime Minister of New Zealand was asked, what do we do without handshakes? And she said, well, you can do an East Coast wave, and demonstrated it. And using sign language onomatopoeia, Alan Went pointed at his face and demonstrated an East Coast wave. And this is a GIF displaying Jacinda Ardern and Alan Went going through that. And it took me 20 minutes to make this GIF, and it was super fun. So this is a photo of one of my previous master classes that I taught back in March. And I got an automated transcript from Zoom. And because I take pauses when I talk, on the right side of this slide, you can see where those pauses happen. And they're interspersed with timestamps. And this could aid in reading, but if I get into a section where I'm talking very quickly, then the transcript turns into this big block of text, which you can see on the right-hand side. And so the usability of transcripts is not necessarily as fluid as we would like them to be. They take some editing in order to make them really readable. And then there's closed captioning. And this is a photo of a closed caption in an awkward place. There's closed captioning covering this gentleman's head. And the reason why is because of a principle of universal design. They say that a production should be filmed so that important visual content doesn't appear where captioning will cover it. And so now I'm going to show you the next frame in this video where Marco Antonio Santos Ramirez has his name listed on the bottom of the screen. And that's why the captioning was moved to the top for this scene, because we don't want captioning to cover important visual content. So if you have a lower third or graphics coming in at the bottom, just be aware that that can conflict with the placement of your captions. There's a lot of different options for captioning. There's offline and real-time captioning. And offline captioning happens after the media has been created, while real-time captioning happens live. Open captioning shows for everyone. You can't turn it off. Everybody sees the captions at the bottom. But closed captioning is special. This can be toggled on and off. When you have closed captioning, then you can see it if you want, or turn it off if you don't want. And so when you're designing a virtual meeting, here's the options for how to provide captions. You can either send a transcript with the replay. You can type the captions manually during the presentation, which gets you live captioning. There's this neat little hack you can do with Google Slides for an efficient and not entirely accurate captioning, or you can have a third-party service provide closed captioning. And those are your 4 real options. But to use any of them, you have to turn captioning on in Zoom. And there's an option in your Zoom settings where you have to go in and manually enable captioning. And if you don't have this already turned on, then you won't see captions as an option in your Zoom toolbar. If you have toggled this on, then you can click this CC button in your toolbar, and then you get this pop-up where you can either assign someone to type captions. You can say, I will type captions, and you can type them as you go, or you can copy an API token from a third-party service. And these screenshots are from the Zoom toolbar and the pop-up itself. So before I get more into captions, I'd like to share with you this neat little hack. If you want to get captions and you don't want to invest in a third-party service, or you need to do it quickly, there's this GIF that demonstrates how to do it. And I have a link to the YouTube video where this gentleman displays how to do it. You share slides through Google Slides, you turn on captions, and it automatically does live captions for you. They don't display very well. It goes into multiple lines, and the accuracy isn't great. So, some people call them craptions because they're not entirely accurate. But if you need to quickly and immediately get captions going and you don't have a lot of other options, this is a good emergency option. You load your slides into Google Slides, you share your slides there and turn on captions. And then you can get some bad captions if you need to. But what we really want to do is we want to get good captions. And a lot of television stations will have good captions in them. And this is a photo of Felix the cat with some captions underneath him. And these kinds of captions can be made in one of 2 ways. They can either be automated through AI, or they can have a human transcriptionist. And AI gives decent accuracy, but it won't pick up lingo. It won't know what to do when there's slang. And so that's why human transcription is really the best of the best. And this is a photo of someone using a stenography machine to create closed captions. And a stenographer is someone who uses the phonemes of words to type out the sounds, which are then translated by a program into English text. These are used in court proceedings where someone will type out the sounds as they come in, and then they're recorded as text in real time. It's actually faster than typing out the English words entirely. In order to use real-time captioning with a human transcriptionist, you need a service such as those offered by one of the logos on this page. There's 5 logos on this page for 3Play Media, Verbit, Stream Text, Vitac, and AI Live. And these are options for having live human transcriptionists. And it costs anywhere from 6 to 60 cents per minute, and you have to schedule it in advance. Because a trained stenographer needs to be available and ready at the start of your meeting, ready to go. And so you schedule these in advance, and then they charge you per minute based on the length of your meeting. And once you sign up with one of these services, they give you a link. That's an API token. And you paste that right into the toolbar for Zoom at the beginning of your meeting, and then you're good to go. So this is a photo of a calendar with some different days that have push pins in them. And now we're going to talk about presentation for accessibility. And I'm going to share with you some things you can do before your meeting to make it more accessible. The day before, send an accessible version of your presentation slides. So that this way, if somebody needs to go through your slides with a screen reader, they understand what you're going to be covering. Also share an agenda so that people know what's going to be discussed. And if there's multiple presenters, share everyone's names. And finally, if you have key acronyms that are used, you want to provide those in advance so that someone can be familiar with the acronyms you're going to go through. I didn't provide the WCAG acronym definition before this meeting because I went into detail to define it during the meeting. But if we were having a meeting where we were talking about WCAG standards, I would make sure to define that acronym in the pre-event email before we go. This is a photo of someone presenting virtually through a laptop. And here's a couple of tips for presenting accessibly. Every time you share an image on your slide, describe it verbally. So that way people who are not visually abled still know what it is that you're communicating. And this is good for people who call in via phone too. If somebody's dialing into your Zoom meeting and they can't see your slides, describing verbally what's presented visually allows them to participate. And Marcus Osterberg brings up a great point. He says that the blind and their needs are often used as an example for accessibility. But when you create things accessibly for blind people, other people benefit too. The things we were talking about with contrast and color, if you make it easier for people with low visual impairment to perceive your text, it also works for people who have full visual ability. Accessibility doesn't just help people with disabilities. It helps everyone. When you're presenting, the pauses matter. Show something and then pause. Chat with someone and then pause. These pauses, they not only allow people the time to digest and interpret what you've provided to them, but it also allows them to formulate their own thoughts about it. When someone asks a question, before going straight into the answer, repeat the question. Because somebody else who's listening may not have really understood the question in its entirety. Hearing the question repeated, maybe even rephrased, it helps people develop that context for what the answer really means. This is a photo of someone facilitating a virtual discussion with multiple people online. And discussions are really critical to developing community online. We used to be able to get everybody together in a room and then talk something out. But now with everything happening so distributed in Zoom, this is one of the only places where we can get a group of people to talk about something. And people with disabilities may not be able to participate in your discussion if you're not facilitating accessibly. If you're hosting a discussion with multiple participants, ask everyone to verbally identify themselves at the beginning. Hi, this is Caelan. Hi, this is Tim. Hi, this is Kay. This gives visually impaired people a verbal cue that they can match with different voices throughout the rest of the meeting. Have people talk one at a time, because when people are talking over one another, it's very difficult to interpret who's saying what. And if you're passing the baton and going from one speaker to another, state your name at the beginning. Caelan speaking. What I think is da-da-da-da-da. What this does is it helps people, especially in replays, if they're listening to an audio replay and they hear one person say something and then someone else say something. If you don't have full visual ability, you might not know who it is that's talking, but this simple insertion, Caelan speaking, it's a tag that lets visually disabled people know who it is that's talking as the voices change. This is especially important with people who have learning disabilities or speech disabilities. If they say something and you're not sure what it was they said, repeat what you think you understand. Because what you think you might understand could be different than what they are trying to communicate. Asking people to clarify and repeat things that you didn't really get, this brings greater clarity to the discussion and makes sure that everybody's on the same page. And finally, if you're facilitating a discussion and there's people with audio impairments, raising hands is a great way to make sure that everyone gets a fair say. A lot of times in in-person environments, if we're facilitating a discussion, we can feel the energy shift as someone is done, and they kind of progress the energy to someone else, and they just pick it up and say, and they know it's the right time to insert their thoughts or to take over the conversation because there's been enough of a pause or there was a couple of ums. There are these verbal cues that we use to signal, I'm kind of done with this section. I've said what I want to say, and I'm opening the floor for someone else to take it from here. Those verbal cues aren't interpretable by many people with audio impairments. And so to make sure that they can fully participate in a discussion, you can use a tool like the Trace Online hand-raising utility. You share a link in the beginning of your meeting, everybody has a separate window open and they use it to raise their hands. Because Zoom does have a raised hand function, but it doesn't let you see what order people raise their hands in. And so if everybody who wants to talk raises their hand and I finish up and I go and I see, oh, 6 people have their hands raised, how do I know who to call on? And so that's why this hand-raising utility is really helpful. And I have a link to this in the webinar accessibility checklist. And so there's a link for this going around with the replay. And before I forget, I'm just going to go ahead and pop a link for this into chat so that if anybody wants to see this after the meeting, it's a really good resource. I hope you get some value out of it. Now, I want to move on to some questions, but before I do, I want to tell you real quick about this Zoom host intensive that I'm hosting in August. I've been doing a lot of work with people who facilitate virtually. And what I found is that really they just need practice. In order to be a confident Zoom host, you've got to practice a little bit with the tool. And so what I've done is created a safe environment for people to practice using Zoom as a good host. And I've got a digital badge that I award to people who complete this program. I'm accredited in the United States for 1 continuing education credit. I'm not currently accredited in New Zealand or Australia, but I'm working for those. But this credential is a digital badge that's recognized by LinkedIn and the Open Badges protocol that certifies people who complete the Zoom Host Intensive as a certified virtual facilitator. And I put together this program because I found that after quarantine started, lots of people who taught face-to-face workshops had to suddenly and immediately go virtual. They had to start teaching virtual workshops right away. And so I did a lot of train the trainer workshops on helping people upskill themselves to using Zoom, helping them facilitate exercises virtually, helping them facilitate discussions through good questions, helping them master the tech. Zoom's an intense tool and there's a lot of different moving pieces to it. And when we can use this tool well, we can create really great experiences. And this is a testimonial from one of my recent clients who had a large team of facilitators that they needed to get online right away. And within a few weeks, we were able to get all of their face-to-face workshops back online with virtual versions. And all the feedback from the facilitators has been really great because they're able to create those same sorts of learning experiences that they used to only do online. So this virtual facilitator certification also comes with my Zoom host checklist, and it consists of 4 90-minute workshops. And we can do those once a day for 4 days or once a week for 4 weeks. And each one of them is a deep dive into the Zoom tech and into virtual facilitation. It's a great program for teachers leading a class, for speakers presenting virtually, for managers who lead a distributed team, and for coaches who lead group programs. During this program, we're going to go over the ins and outs of your connection speed and how to best optimize it, how to share your screen with videos so that it's best seen by your participants. We're going to practice breakout rooms and polls so that all of the different exercises that we have available with Zoom are exercises that you can use in your virtual experiences. So there's information about this at the end of the webinar accessibility checklist. And if you'd like to join me, I'd be happy to work with you in August. Because what I really believe is that now that our communities have gone online, the more that we can move in harmony with those communities, the stronger connections we can make. And while we're in quarantine, our cultures rely on these distributed connections. And those connections rely on good Zoom hosts. And so that's why I've made it my mission this year to help Zoom hosts become better at facilitating virtual meetings. So thanks so much for joining me for this presentation on making virtual meetings accessible. For those of you who are joining me live, I'd like to have some Q&A so that if anybody has any questions, let's hang out and talk for a little bit.
Hi, Caelan. It's Kay here.
Hi, Kay. How you going?
That was really great. I want to share that with other groups, and is it okay if I forward this to a large organisation that talks the talk but doesn't walk it in
Please
terms
do.
of accessibility?
Yeah. That link that I shared in chat for the accessibility checklist, you can just go ahead and share with them that link.
Great.
Great.
Just copied that.
This masterclass is going to be available for replay, and there's a link to opt into it in the checklist itself. And I'll send the replay out to everybody who's registered. And if you'd like to share the replay of this presentation with anyone, I just ask that you share the opt-in page instead of the watch page, which I'm going to share with all of you who have registered to join.
Do you also run reflection workshops with people who have done Zoom and maybe they've recorded it and they need to get tips to how to do better in future?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually part of the Zoom Host Intensive. It's a 10-hour program, but there's only 6 hours of instruction. And part of that last 4 hours is recording a Zoom presentation using what you've learned, sending it to me for feedback, and then I provide notes and detailed feedback on how you can improve.
Nano Girl, you may know as Michelle Dickinson, who presents, said that when she is preparing for a presentation, she records herself, then she watches with sound off so she can see if she's got it right visually. Then she listens with sound only to see if it still makes sense. It takes 3 times as long, but because of that, she is an expert science communicator.
That's brilliant. I really like that. Wow. Very smart. Thank you for sharing that, Kay. Tim, I see you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, so I have 2 questions. One's a practical one and the other one's more of a small p politics one. The practical one is you mentioned those 5 closed captioning services, and obviously there's a range of costs, range of services. Do you, if you feel you're able to, do you have a recommendation for the one that offers the best balance of the best quality at a reasonable cost, I guess is what I'm thinking based on that price range you mentioned?
Well, I haven't done enough work with those separate organizations to really be able to tell which one is the best value. I've gotten some quotes for closed captioning, which are way beyond 60 cents a minute, surprisingly beyond. So I do want to let you know that there are some much higher quotes out there that you can get. But I find that you can get good quality in that range of 6 to 60 cents. Out of those companies, 3Play Media has a lot of leadership in this space. They create content that shows other people how to be more accessible. And the other companies, they have good accessibility, but they're not as proactive in upskilling the general populace as 3Play Media are. And I find that 3Play Media, they're not just their content, but also their services are top notch. There might be somebody who's better value than them, but from what I've seen so far, I like 3Play Media.
Thanks. So my second question was, I'm thinking of a couple of different things I'm going to be involved in. How to phrase it? Do you, your testimony, I'm not sure of the size of organizations you generally work with. If you encounter organizations that are reluctant to engage, how should I put it? Some organizations are probably keener to engage than others. When you encounter organizations that are reluctant to engage or perceive this as too difficult, have you found particular arguments or ways of approaching them to be effective?
Well, I haven't used this, but if I wanted to convince someone of the importance of this, I would describe a liability case that was brought last year to Beacon Health Options. And Beacon Health Options is an insurance company that had a blind employee that sued them because they were expecting her to do her job with inaccessible technologies. They used WebEx for their video conferencing. And she said, hey, can we use Zoom? I can't use this technology and participate in conversations. And it took 4 years for them to finally switch to Zoom. And they had all these internal training that they required their employees to do. And the LMS they used, the learning management system, was not built for accessibility at all. It was very visual, and it had all these animations and transitions, and she couldn't participate in the education that she was being graded on for her job performance. How well she performed in these online courses determined how well she was doing at her job. And so she sued them in US District Court because they weren't providing an accessible environment for one of their own employees. And so I would have a discussion around the dangers and risks of not providing an accessible environment, not just for their own employees, but also for the general public.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Great questions. Tabitha says in the chat here that another good app for closed captions and transcribing is Live Caption. I haven't used Live Caption, so that's one that I'm going to check out for sure. Tristram, I see you've got your hands raised.
Hi, and thank you, Caelan, for a fantastic presentation. I work with a small not-for-profit agency who supports people with disabilities, but constantly struggles for funding. And so therefore, my question, it may be that it's outside of the scope that you can answer, but are you aware of any incentive programs or funding options that might encourage groups or business to take up web content accessibility and Zoom accessibility? Thank you.
I don't know of any, Tristram. I'll be frank, I'm a newbie in accessibility. I only started really taking a serious interest in accessibility within the last 5 or 6 weeks. Well, it's been a couple of months. I worked with a disability-focused organization here who needed to bring their face-to-face workshops into virtual workshops rather quickly. They were one of the, I worked with 5 or 6 different organizations right after quarantine hit. And one of them teaches other organizations about disability and accessibility. And so they said, when we present, we need our webinar to be as accessible as possible. And I said, okay, I'm going to find the manual. And there wasn't one. And so that's what sent me down this whole road. So that said, I'm new to this whole area, but what I found is there are some collections of resources and experts in virtual summits. There's this, I don't recall the website, but it's something like the Ally Summit. No, it's Ally Bytes. That's what it was. Ally Bytes has, oh wait, that's going private to you, Tabitha, sorry. To everybody, Ally Bytes, it's spelled like this. If you Google this on YouTube, what you'll find is a bunch of experts who got together to share best practices, knowledge, industry trends, things like this. And I'm seeing more of these accessibility themed virtual conferences happening over the next few months. And so I'm planning to participate in these just to go and learn from some of these experts. And there's a very good chance, Tristram, that somewhere in that community, there are people who do have the answer to your question.
Thank you very much.
Sure thing. Well, we're at the top of the hour. Does anyone else have any questions or thoughts? Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody who's attending to watch this live. And for those of you who are watching this on the replay, thanks for making it this far. Really happy with the progress that we made today. We covered a lot of ground, and I hope that everybody makes their meetings more accessible in the future. And Kay, this is you've just provided a link to us in the chat box. I'll check that out after the presentation, and you should be getting the replay by tomorrow. Thanks so much, everyone. It's great spending time with you today. Have fun out there.